Thank you very much, Fanny. And I'd also like to thank Alliance Francaise for inviting me tonight to moderate this talk. And I apologize in advance for any French mispronunciations that I might have. So I think tonight we have a very special guest in the form of Jean-Marc Roda. He is not only an economist with CIRAD, but he's also a scientist with the Paris Sorbonne University. So he's very well qualified to talk about this subject. Palm oil, a French economist view. As we all know, there's a lot of diplomatic hoo-ha right now with palm oil. The Europeans are very concerned about environmental issues, and Malaysia and Indonesia, in fact, are very concerned about economic livelihood. So we have a very interesting discussion ahead, Jean-Marc. So why don't you start by giving us a little bit of background about CIRAD, which is a French agricultural research center for international development.
Okay, the story of CIRAD starts actually long before CIRAD with the story of palm oil. So a long time ago, before even Napoleon, the French started to have colonies, and they were collecting plants all over the world, and they were exchanging these plants. And they were trying plants here, and whether it grows better there. They were doing all these trials, mostly amateurs work. But already it was pushed by the king, and you had a botanical garden in Mauritius and Réunion. Mauritius was called l'île Bourbon, it was a French island. Only after Napoleon he went to the British, because of the independence. So in this garden, you had Pierre Poivre, who stole the cloves from the Dutch. A story by itself. His guy had a lot of stuff, and in that garden you had a collection of palm trees. Best palm trees of all Africa. And you had later on institutions that France was maintaining all over the tropical countries. These technical institutions were using such gardens, there were several of them, to have seeds, to have plants, to try everywhere. So in that palm garden of Mauritius Island, Réunion Island, 4 seeds went away by 2 different ways, and they end up to be the mothers of all the palm oil that you have here. So that's the connection. And those institutions that were using such gardens actually were technical institutions in the former French colonies. They were specialists in fishery, in banana, in palm oil, and so on. And CIRAD is the merge of all these older institutions. Of course, there is no colonies anymore. So it's now a tool for the French government to do development and research in the tropics and to fight poverty in the countries that are the poorest and to fight hunger in the countries that have the most problem of food. So that's what CIRAD is doing research, technical research in the south for such issues.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting stories about palm oil. I mean, I can't imagine like just a simple fruit. Can I call it a fruit? Like palm oil has so many stories. For example, earlier on we were having a conversation with Chandran of RSPO, and he told me that palm oil is actually a grass, right? Or it's from the bamboo family. I mean, my mind was blown away. I cannot imagine that. But CIRAD, does CIRAD follow any agenda of any particular lobby?
Of course, it is an institution that somehow belongs to the French government. CIRAD budget is like 50-60% the French government. And 40-50% is all the projects that we get from Malaysian government. I did work at CIRAD for the Malaysian government with Malaysian money. So in that regard, like any research company that is doing a lot of consulting as well, we have the agenda of the people who pay us somehow. But it's a nest of scientists. And the scientists of the worst case. They don't follow anyone, you know. There's a joke in CIRAD, is try to herd cats You know, you picture cats and you try to herd them. That's trying to make CIRAD scientists going into a predetermined agenda direction. No, it doesn't work. They go where they want as scientists.
Yeah.
So I hope I answer your
I
question.
totally understand what you mean because I have cats and they're totally out of control. So from an economic viewpoint, it sort of made sense for France to have so much influence in the early stages of bringing palm oil into Malaysia. And from speaking to you earlier and a few days ago, you're saying that the yields in the tropical countries are much better than some of the more developed nations to the north, who are also big producers of edible oils, because in the tropics we have so much sunshine and water.
Yeah, totally. I think I have a slide, maybe a couple of slides somewhere, where you see the slides you're speaking about. That's the history. We can come back on the history. What you're asking me is this. Everything grows under the sun in temperate country or as in tropical zones. And if you compare things that you can compare, you cannot compare palm oil with banana or palm oil with coconut. Coconut is a palm tree, but you cannot compare a palm oil with mango trees. What you can compare is the product, which is vegetal oil that are produced by a few plants in the world. The 4 major vegetable oils that are traded and produced around the world are palm oil, sunflower, rapeseed, and soybean oil. And if you look at those graphics, the upper one is the number of hectares you need to grow 1 ton of oil from soybean, which is big. Then you need a little bit less of hectares to grow sunflower oil, and a bit less for rapeseed. And to make 1 ton of palm oil, you need so little. And the other graphic is the same picture, but how much tons you can do with 1 hectare. And the figure that you have here is 3.5 ton per hectare. This is the average smallholders, non-educated smallholders producing level. When you have a company that has good seeds, good fertilizer, everything in agronomically well controlled, you can go up easily to 7 tons. And with the best trials of CIRAD in the world, we have places where with the best seeds and the best ground, volcanic ground, we have up to 12 tons per hectare. Take the good one, the one that you manage if you're a professional one. 7 tons. Take that compared to these all below 0.5 tons per hectare. You totally outgrow any of all the other oils in the world, vegetal oils. And even if you're uneducated farmers with bad seeds that you bought on the roadside, you make 3.5 tons. So if I am a farmer and I am poor, if someone gives me those seeds, I get out of the poverty. Straight. We can discuss that later. Mm-hmm. But that is the gift of tropical weather. Equatorial and mess, because palm oil grows in humid tropical weather. So you have sun, you have water, it grows amazingly. That's answering your question,
mm-hmm. Yes,
I think.
It does. And as a result of this, of course, there is a lot of politics that goes on in the edible oils industry, and we'll go into that a little bit later. But before that, I think it's good to point out that palm oil today has a lot of uses. It's used industrially in cosmetics and in foods as well. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that.
Yes. Oh, you make me jumping among my slides. I prepared
Sorry.
so many slides, but okay. So
what was your
history of palm oil? We will come back if you ask me later on. Yeah. Maybe by the questions. So we are jumping to the use.
I'm like a cat as well.
We cannot control him. Yeah. So I hope the picture is good there. That's what are the main uses of palm oil in the world. You see an overwhelming blue sector that is food. You put palm oil in every food as cooking oil, but as ingredients for your margarine, for your processed food, for chocolate, everything. You have another part of the palm oil that is used for the industry, and you make soaps, detergents, plastics, candles, everything. You have to realize that, you know, the everyday plastic that you use, they come from fossil fuel, from the oil that is taken out of the ground. This oil is called organic chemistry. You take, actually, it's basically plants in eons before our life that were get fossilized, some not fossilized but compressed, and with the time it becomes something that you can use as a oil or as a charcoal. Palm oil is the same organic material before to be processed by the nature. So it's one step more. But if you take it, you have pure organic chemistry. So you can put palm oil in a refinery, and at the end you will get all the same products, including composites and plastics. So you do everything you want with that. The last use of palm oil is a recent use at the time of the, I mean, speaking of the history of palm oil, it's very recent, is to make electricity, biofuel, heating, you know, all of this. Coming back to the use of as food, something very recent also is the industrialization of the food. You know, you all eat frozen food. You all eat, you know, those small prepared food that you heat in the microwave. I'm sure. You all eat yogurts and kind of jello prepared stuff. All of this contain palm oil. To have a prepared food that is holding and not melting like this in front of you, you need some vegetal fat, some fat first, not vegetal, that holds to the temperature, that needs tips to keeps the solidity. It's somewhat solid. Then you can have something consistent. And when you cook that in a factory, you have some heat. So you need something that withstands the heat without to become cancerogen. The oil, among the oils that withstand the most the heat, is palm oil. And the one that is almost solid at ambient temperature is palm oil. So it is benefit from the, how to say, McDonaldization of the food. You know that junk food that everyone eat, but it is the best and cheapest oil you can use for industrial purposes. So all of you, when you have excipient, you know, without name, in the fat category, is palm oil. Vegetal origin. It's everywhere. You cannot avoid it. It's the most effective technically. That's why it's used a lot in the food markets.
So going back to where we jumped off earlier on, so going back to the original question, so it does make a lot of economic sense, especially for Malaysia, right? For Malaysia and Indonesia, and these are all developing economies. They need this as a kind of, should I say, solution, one of the solutions for their economic growth. It does make sense to these countries to do this.
It does make sense. It does make sense to every tropical country that has regular rainfall over the year, without too much dry season. Mm-hmm. When you have that, you produce palm oil, and it becomes economically extremely profitable. This is another map of the uses. You see that the first use that you use is the crude palm oil, CPO. You can refine it. You use in the cooking and the food. And then you can, as I said, make soap, glycerin, many chemical products. Sorry for... I am spied by NSA. I think it's Siri, you know, that they want to know what I'm saying on the palm oil.
Yes.
No. They learn that there is a French talk, so they are spying the French embassy, so they say there is no Faraday cage there. So. And you see that if you go further in the transformation, you have derivatives, and you could go up to the specialties like cosmetic perfumes. Every step of the oleochemistry, as they call it, you add the added value. You go up to 600%, up to 700, 800% of the added value. Of course, it's extremely profitable. What
So-
is... Yeah.
That picture is quite interesting, and it suggests that further up the picture, Europe is dominating in terms of the value added. You're talking about 300% to 600%, whereas the basic raw producers like Malaysia and Indonesia lower down the value added scale. is there some move right now for some of, like a chance for Malaysia and Indonesia to move up the value-added scale?
Yes, actually, Malaysia is more advanced on this regard than Indonesia. You have already Oleon, some industries that are doing a lot of downstream oleochemistry, but it's not generalized for all Malaysia, and very far from it in Indonesia. So the main added value now is still in Rotterdam, where you have the imports of palm oil and where they do those products that goes later on in the Chanel or Dior perfume, or soaps or other chemistry products. Of course, there is a challenge, and of course, Malaysia and Indonesia want to go downstream. Statistically, today that's the limit. Half of it for the most of the company. I don't say that some Malaysian companies are not very. They may be downstream, but in general, they are not so much. So. If you look at the letters below, it's an Indonesian newspaper. It was last year, and or in December, I think, when you had that discussion between EU and Indonesia. Indonesians were absolutely infuriated with the idea of not selling any more palm oil to the prospect of not selling more any palm oil to Indonesia, even for biofuel. So they were titling in their titles, media, that's why they are always provocative, Larangan, Uni, Europa, Jadi, Peluang, Ilirasi, Industri Sawit. It means, they are banning our stuff, okay, we are going downstream. We are going to do more added value. That's the stuff. So it has kind of, I don't know if it is only mediatic, or it is representing really well the government position, but there is a trigger, something, somewhere, yeah.
So let's move into, and I hope I'm not jumping very far ahead here. Let's move into the politics a little. What we're eating and the way we are eating is changing. And how is this affecting the production of food around the world, like especially on vegetable oils?
Okay, so that will be a bit longer. By the way, no, we'll come back to the health issue later on.
Yeah, the health, and it affects the health. There is no good oil or bad oil, right? Is palm oil a good oil?
No. See, that's all a list of all the oils that you have. You have the main component, the linoleic acid, the alpha-linolenic acid, oleic acid, and you see the composition of them is different. It gives them different properties. Some of them do not resist at all at the temperature. Everyone grown in Mediterranean country using olive oil know that you don't put olive oil on the pan. You don't fry with olive oil. Otherwise, it becomes very bad for your health. You have cancerogen stuff. No one in the Mediterranean countries would put olive oil in the heat. It doesn't sustain heat. Palm oil, on the contrary, sustains heat. But try to eat palm oil cold in a salad. It's something difficult. So olive oil is better for that. So actually, each of these oils, they have their good use and their bad use. And each of them has a limit. If you eat too much butter, in some European countries, the kitchen is only butter, you end up very quickly with some arteries issues. So people ask you to go to the vegetable oil. And butter is not forbidden. No one banned the butter for health issues. It's way more toxic than any palm oil in terms of heart attack and health issues. But of course, it's part of the food diet of some people and of some cultures. And if you eat moderately your food with butter, you will be perfectly healthy. Same is for the palm oil. So there is no bad oil, no good oil. You have a good use of the products.
So looking at some of these four major oils, you have soybean, rapeseed, sunflower, and palm oil. Palm oil used to have the smallest market share of the four, but now it's jumped to number one. All right, and this making some countries and some producers very unhappy.
Yes, to answer that question, I will come back to the issues of politics that you were telling me, because it's a political issue. The graph that you have here shows you it's maybe far from your eyes, but basically it's from 1700, the history, the record of what people, that in this case it was in French. I found a French publication that. In the black line on the first graphic, increased because the food increased with the time. People were hungry in the past. And they arrived and one day they were full and it stabilized. That stabilization was around the 1900. And the green line is the cereals, the starch, everything starchy. Came out and again came down, because when you get plenty of food, you don't need to eat that much cereals, and you start to increase your intakes of proteins and especially your intake of fats. So if you look at the other graphics, the translation of this in terms of kilocalorie. But green on the top, carbohydrates, all the starch. It goes down when the people get richer. What goes up when the people get richer is the fat. Protein remains stable. And if you look at that in terms of world situation, you have 3 lines. The plain line is developed and emerging countries. The other line, a kind of dotted line on the top, is the developed countries. And the lower line is the least developed countries. And what you have is the food supplies in kilocalorie. And you see that the developed countries, they reach a kind of ceiling. They are stagnating now. They have no hunger issue. Developing and emerging countries still increase their consumption. And the least developed countries are far from the rest. And if you translate in those animal protein and fat consumption, you see that developing and emerging countries are very, very far from the levels of the developed countries. Now look at the vegetable fat. In every cities in the world, people realize that animal fat is not so good for the health when you eat too much of it, so they are shifting with the diets. They are shifting to vegetal fat. You have a lot of advertisement in the magazines for ladies, for children, and so on. Eat more vegetable fat is better for the health. So the same, you see the increase of consumption for vegetal fat consumption or vegetal oils. And what you look is, even for the developed countries, the ceiling is not yet reached, in average. So that tells you that the market is not finished to increase, because you will continue to replace animal fat by vegetal fat, even in the developing countries. Which oil, that would be the question. Before to go to these oils, just to remind you that you see that there is a correlation between the consumption of fat, whether it is protein on the top or fat in the below, and the revenue, the income. But you have a similar relationship with the urbanization. Of course, people in the cities are richer. So if you look at the urban population, it is increasing fast in the developing emerging countries. So if you're business people and you do marketing, people are going to eat more fat in the future, and more fat if they get rich and if they go in the cities. And where in the world the cities and the income is growing the faster today? Emerging and developing countries? Market potential. So people projecting in the middle class plus 1.3 billion people in the coming years, 2023. Where? This is the other graph. It's too small for you to read, probably. I read you. China, India, Nigeria, Pakistan, Indonesia, and so on. France is not there. It's very far. These are all the emerging countries that are growing very fast, where the market is going to be.
Jean-Marc, can you, I don't know whether you're in a position to settle something before we move on. There is this debate now between saturated fat and unsaturated fat, and not all the grains or vegetable oils are the same, right? For example, is palm oil in the saturated or category?
Alors, it's not about saturation. Saturation is when you want to make the oil resisting to the heat or stable at the ambient temperature, so more solid, for the junk food we were speaking about, for what you eat in the frozen food or you heat in the microwave, this food needs solid fat. Fat makes your food looking solid a bit, not to be too mushy. For that, you have 2 ways. You use an oil that is naturally problem is I can't remember whether it is saturated or unsaturated. It's one of each, but saturated. Thank you. Or you can make you can take an oil that is not, but you can transform it chemically to become saturated. And if you do such, the result that you have can be way worse in terms of health hazard on the long term. I was told, I am not a specialist, you have some specialists in the room, you ask them better. And that's the issue. The issue is whether you transform it or whether you use a natural oil. But at the end, the real problem to me is the dose that you take. Don't take, it's not the palm oil, it's the junk food that you're eating. You know, stop to take junk food, you will have less health hazard before to think about palm oil danger or cancer from palm oil.
So there are some of the world's biggest edible oil producers. They're known by the acronym ABCD. A is for Archers, Daniels, Midland. B is for Bunge. C, Cargill, and D, Louis Dreyfus, which control about 60 to 70% of the agribusiness empire, right?
Yes.
And then on our side of the world, the palm oil players are pretty small. We have the likes, relatively small. I mean, on their own, they're pretty big companies, but compared to the ABCD, the likes of Wilmar and Cinemas and IOI and Sime Darby, all these players are relatively small.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, very true.
So how is the competitiveness of palm oil affected by these relative sizes?
Before the competitiveness, you see the graphic there, it's the growth of oil in many countries, regions, North America, Europe, former Soviet Union, Central America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and so on. All the red arrows that you see, it is what will increase in the coming 10, 20, 30 years. The companies you're speaking about are all looking at this. This is the market we were talking. So you're asking about me, I jump course. We will come back to that. That is, yes, they are here. I can start to answer with you like this. They are looking at these red arrows, and the red arrows are the growth of the oil. And you ask me the number one. Here you have four lines. The four major oils we spoke about. And the one that is decreasing in pink is soybean. It is relative market share. It's not decreasing in reality, it's decreasing in terms of percentage in the market. So market share of soybean is decreasing. Market share of the orange one, rapeseed, is stable. Sunflower below is also decreasing. And the one that is increasing without to stop, the green one, is palm oil. And who is specialist of the other oils is the famous ABCD you are speaking, the big American 3 companies and 1 European. Altogether, they control 60 or 70% of the cereal market and all the agri-food in the world. It's huge, it's massive. And you have the growth of palm oil that is taking market shares year after year to the other oils from this country. And these are produced by multinationals that are smaller, as you said. You take Olam or Wilmar, they are 10 times smaller than one of those big 4. And they are taking all the market, all of the future real big market of the emerging countries. So today you have steak, you have Western, I can call them Western companies. 3 are American, 1 is Europe-based, but they have their stake all over the world. China, Japan, all over the world, except, it is very interesting, maybe look at after, in a few countries in the world. And you have a few emerging companies from Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia that eat year after year some of their market shares in some of their products, like those. So behind all of this discussion of palm oil, what you have is a real economic war or battle, not between states, but between economic corporations, business corporations, big corporations.
So is there a land grab that's going on? I mean, if the ABCDs are looking at the growing consumption and the growing dollar signs, right, from a lot of these markets, are they in a position to also buy over palm oil plantations, palm oil land bank?
Put yourself in the shoes of those, all of you, everyone, and you. You put yourself in the shoes of people in those companies. You have seen my first slide that you asked me to show with the productivity of palm oil compared to the other seeds. These guys, they are controlling the northern seeds that are producing that much. And they know that palm oil in the south is producing more. And they have those markets, you know, the little red arrows that you see, to conquer. Of course, where they can grow that? They cannot grow that in the US. They cannot grow that in Europe. So they are looking at the future market where they are going to have their stakes to grow the oil to feed the planet. Of course, they are investing now. So if you look at this question, is it the next one? No, not the next one. Maybe, yes. Oh. In blue, do you see well on the screen? Perfect. In blue, you have the investors. Who is investing in securing the land? For them, it's not land grabbing. It's securing the production, the agricultural production of the next 50 years. USA is grabbing land. Who is the second one to grab land? Malaysia. I told you there is an economic war between ABCDs and those corporations from Southeast Asia, where the land is free to grow palm oil. Not in Malaysia and Indonesia anymore, it's full. You have deforestation is done, plantation of palm oil is done, you have not much less space. So where you can go? Good answer, Africa. Everyone is going to Africa, where the palm oil is originating, by the way. So they are all investing in Africa, a bit in Papua also, and actually a lot in Papua. But altogether, is the Africa the main place to invest? And those Sinarmas, Sime Darby, all of these companies, they are investing already in Africa. And you have a race, a real race, to be those who are going to control, to secure the most land in Africa, are you ABCD member, or are you Olam, Sinarmas, Sime Darby member? You are all racing for that, because if you plant there, you will control the production of the next 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm. So we've set the stage and the background for the kind of politics that go into edible oils production. And we've fast forward to today in the EU policy. What exactly is the wording of the policy, the technical wording of the policy? Because you're not banning palm oil outright, right? It has some kind of ending, putting a stop to the kind of subsidy that goes into palm oil biofuels in the EU.
Actually, EU is importing a substantial part of palm oil. It's kind of recent. Before the 2000, the quantity of palm oil coming into Europe was quite anecdotal. Not anecdotal, but it was still a few millions. But it was really on the food on one side and on the industry the other side, like the perfumes I told you. And what did happen in the 2000? I have slides on that, I think. I have to jump. You make me jumping everywhere. You're terrible. Those journalists, you know. You cannot control the scientists, but you cannot control the journalists either. So let's step the side. This is Europe. So this is what I call the European nightmare. First, you have to realize that the main production of vegetable oil in Europe is rapeseed. A bit of sunflower also, but rapeseed. This is the orange in those grapes. You have all the countries, and you realize that France and Germany, the big share of their biodiesel consumption is made of rapeseed. And the problem of EU is not palm oil for the food or palm oil for the oleochemistry, is that in the 2000s, they wanted to promote their biodiesel industry. Smart idea, go bio. Stop to use fossil fuel. And the smartest idea that they had, to promote biodiesel, lest decrease the fiscality on the biodiesel. Like this, you will increase the intake and the use of it, and people will buy bio oil to make it. Because rapeseed is quite expensive. We'll come back to that later. And that worked very well. You see the increase, 2003, defiscalization of biodiesel, the increase of industrial domestic consumption is increasing like that for oils. And you see in black, palm oil. It increased also palm oil. Palm oil was really anecdotal up so far to make biodiesel in Europe. And also in dot, soybean oil. So what did happen? And that's the terrible nightmare. Between these two dates, each time you were having a hike in the price of the rapeseed, because you have storms, you have bad weather, bad years. Some years the rapeseed doesn't grow so well. It's Europe, it's North Europe, so the weather is not fantastic, it's not sunny every day, or you have disease. So it doesn't produce the same all the time. So prices going up and down. And each time you have the prices going by 1%, the prices in the rapeseed, you have the volume of palm oil increasing by 3%. I don't know if you realize, I do oil here with my rapeseed, and it's expensive. And each time the price increases a bit, it's so easy for me not to buy that, but to buy palm oil that I can get from the harbor, and which is way cheaper. So during those years, the relationship between the price and the of rapeseed and the palm oil imports is totally linear, completely fantastic relationship. Of course, panic, because EU was starting to basically subsidize palm oil. And the origin of what they wanted was to help the biodiesel, but also the local farmers. So it was counterproductive. So they stopped. But I call it the Pandora box, because once they stopped, you see the dot on the second graphic, it remains at sky high level. People tested palm oil to make biodiesel. They found it very cheap and very reliable. They didn't want to stop to use it. And here in red, you have the imported palm oil up to 2016, the last numbers. You see it doesn't decrease, actually. That's the use of different oils to make the biodiesel in Europe. So that's political stuff. And now what they have done is, okay, let's create, first they want to end up the diesel and the biodiesel by 2030, I think. You have a regulation of that, and you have a regulation that wants to make sure that the oils that you're using during this time are going to be your oils that are not environmentally harmful. And that's what they draw. And when they draw the bill or the regulation, they describe for every oil a set of criteria. Extremely technical criteria, taking in account whether it's a plant that grows annually or grows over several years, what are the average yields at the world level of such plants, and so on. So this is in those highly technical details that lies the devil, as I say, because if you look carefully, it singles out the only tropical crop, which is palm oil. And it infuriates, of course, the stakeholders from Indonesia and Malaysia. They have the feeling to be, singled out. And all the other oils are temperate oils. Rapeseed is, soybean is a bit of, is origin of temperate, but part of it has been adapted to subtropical weather. So rapeseed has also a stake in deforestation of tropical forest, but is not targeted the same way technically than tropical, so in the small details. So, of course, they have a deep feeling of unfairness because you are looking especially at deforestation in Malaysia and Indonesia, but not really looking at the deforestation on Amazon. So this is where, I don't say it's bad or good, what I say is it is in those technical details that you have a deep feeling of resentment by the Malaysian and Indonesian stakeholders.
And how did this come about? Does this have the fingerprints of the ABCD being involved in very strong lobby to bring about this policy?
I don't think so. I don't think that policy particularly come from the ABCDs. I think if I have to speculate a bit about any fingerprints, I would say Trump.
Donald Trump?
Donald Trump. You have heard that Donald Trump is a loghead against China import-export of deals. And one of the retortion of China is, okay, you make my life difficult, I stop to import your soybean from North America. And the problem is Donald Trump was elected by what people call in a newspaper the rednecks. You know, the middle America, most of them are farmers, and most of them are growing soybean. So if he stopped to sell soybean, he has problems with his electorate base. So what he did, he went back to Europe and is arm wrestling with Europe. And at least for France, it did work because in the last year or year and a half, I have to check the numbers, but what is sure is you had a growth of 153% of import of American soybean by France. This soybean is used for the feed of the cattle, but the byproduct of that soybean is oil, soybean oil, which is used for biofuel. So now you have another issue. Macron, the French president, he has also his rednecks. They are not rednecks, they are called FNSEA and agricultural. Look at the number 3 of the Macron list for European election. It's very soon. Just look. Number 3 or 4, you check. Fingerprint is there as well. It's not ABCD. I mean, it could be D in the ABCD. Who knows? What is sure is interest of the farmers. Trump takes in interest his rural electorate. Macron as well. I'm sure Merkel also. And what is sure, if you import more soybean as byproduct of which byproduct is the soybean oil, and you don't want to decrease the rapeseed oil, the third oil imported heavily is palm oil. So who do you decrease, rapeseed or palm oil seed? If you're politician from Europe. Of course, you look at palm oil seed. That's what is happening. That is for sure. There is a connection there. I don't say that someone remote control those bills, but there is an economic relation that is there.
And we're also moving into the actual sustainability discussion right now. And is it crazy to take a kind of food and to put it into a vehicle? I mean, as a start, that itself is kind of a controversial policy, isn't it? And a lot of EU politicians also believe that it is crazy for food security, it is crazy for climate control when you take a plant and put it into your car.
I will go divert again. I love to do digressions. To answer that, come back to 19th century, the 1900s, the beginning of the 20th century. You have someone called Rudolf Diesel. You have heard about him. He invented the diesel engine. And he invented the diesel engine to make the farmers of Europe auto-sufficient. Why? Because they have oil. They grow oil on their farms, vegetable oils. And he designed an engine that runs with vegetable oils. Fantastic engine, called the diesel. Later on, people realized you can run the same engine with fossil oil as well, works well. But the origin of the diesel was vegetable oil. And it was considered as a byproduct. So the farmer, at the origin, is growing pigs, cows, wheat. He's growing soybean to feed his cows. He has a byproduct, vegetable oil, doesn't know what to do. Let's put in the engine. Mm-hmm. That was the initial thinking of the diesel. After that, the history took another course and used the fossil fuel for that. Mm-hmm. And everything has become fossil fuel. So by a strange twist of the history, now people are criticizing why you should put diesel, oil, vegetable oil in diesel. Diesel was conceived for that, for vegetable oil. But of course, in a world where hunger is increasing, where you have people fighting, not physically yet, but almost, to grab the land, to secure the land, and to grow the food for the emerging and growing numbers of people, it looks totally crazy to use land to make fuel instead of making food first. It comes into what people call technologically the first generation of biofuel, because you have other generations behind. So this first generation actually is extremely old. It's end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century technology. Using ethanol in an engine or using oil in the engine. But this is what we manage well.
Mhm.
Now, we start technologically to master at industrial scale new second generation biofuel, which are using the waste. Imagine that you are speaking about the starch, you know, the corn, the wheat, everything, the mango, the ananas, the oil that you get from everything that you grow for the human consumption is in average 1/3 of the biomass of the plant that you grow. In average, 3/3 of the plant that you grow goes back either by compost or most of the time burnt on the side by the farmers, goes back in the atmosphere. Is the straw, is the bark, is everything. This biomass, when you grow 1 ton of biomass, actually you use for the human consumption only 1/4 of it. And the second generation biofuel, they can use that 3/4 that today people, most of them in the world, burn. Just look at Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Southeast Asia. When people dispose their agricultural waste is by burning them. Even not into the field, on the side, you know. So the future is most probably when that technology becomes cheaper than the fossil fuel. Because today, fossil fuels are still cheaper than that. But that's the future, because 70% of the biomass grown by humankind on Earth is totally wasted. Could become fuel. It's a fantastic resource. So you have plenty of companies working on that, trying to convince the governments to do, and they're already working on that in the Western countries. Problem, in the tropical countries, only one country is doing that, Brazil. They use initially they were using the sugar of the sugarcane to make ethanol. Now they're using, with special yeast, the fermentation of the bagasse, you know, the lignocellulosic part of the sugarcane. Indonesia is willing to do the same. So they have contracts with those American companies, and they are going to import production of ethanol. But they have palm oil home. So first, they are going to grow even more palm oil to have their fuel. If I want to illustrate that, jumping again, here we are, no, here. This is the blueprint of Pertamina. Pertamina is the Petronas of Indonesia. Oh, I'm very sorry.
Okay.
I don't know. I really think that the NSA is spying on me. You have to put it somewhere very far. Near your phone, like this, they spy your phone. This is the blueprint, and you see that this country, Indonesia, was producing oil, is the light blue bars, and their production of petrol is going down. But their population and their needs are increasing. So the black line is increasing. So what is in between is the gap of what they need to import. They need to import oil every year more. Each time they import oil, from their point of view, they are spending $1 of Qatari or Saudi petrol, and that $1 of Indonesian money evaporates, from their point of view, under the sun of the Qatar or the Saudi Arabia. Now they are thinking, I can produce the same fuel with $2, and I do it biofuel. Either ethanol from lignocellulosic waste, or easier, palm oil from my palm oil. $2 that are staying in my economy. It's subsidies, of course, but they're staying in my economy. So I am indirectly subsidizing my farmers, my small farmers that are growing palm oil. Fantastic, I'm going to do that. And they are going to do that. This is their blueprints in the coming years. Of course, it's in Indonesia. It doesn't go fast, so maybe they will be a little bit late in their plan, but they have millions of liters on the plan for the fuel from ethanol, second generation, and the fuel from biodiesel, first generation. Brazil has done it. Probably Malaysia is thinking about it. Malaysia is a smaller country, smaller number of population. They have relatively more oil compared to the number of population. They are less in a hurry than the Indonesians. But that's the future of the tropical countries, for sure.
So this is very interesting because it seems to me it's not really about, let's say, deforestation per se, but it is about how you manage the resources to see what harms the environment less, right? And therefore we come to the idea of what is sustainable and enter, RSPO, which is the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil. And I think Malaysia and Indonesia also have come up with their own version of sustainable certification, the MSPO, Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil, and the Indonesian Sustainable Palm Oil. I think we're coming to the close of the session, and we want to leave some time for Q&A. So what are your sentiments about these sustainability organizations?
Before to come to this organization, I will describe them. I put a slide that describe first deforestation. From the point of view of Indonesia and Malaysia, this is Malaysia. You see the forest loss, the maximum was in the 70s. And you see that the palm oil extension started after the deforestation started to decrease. So when the deforestation started to decrease, this is when palm oil really started to increase. So there is no real correlation. Of course, there is some deforestation by palm oil, of course, and I can show you that. This is, in red, the real deforestation that can be the real deforestation that is happening in Malaysia by forest extension. So you have to distantiate yourself from the discourse. All the deforestation is coming from palm oil. It's not true. It's only a part. And you see that it is a bell curve. The maximum deforestation by the palm oil was in the 80s, 90s, and it is decreasing now. It's not finished, but it's linear. It's the end of it. It's structural. You have the same in Indonesia, exactly for different reasons. In the two countries, of course, you have fantastic forests that are for the humankind. They have biodiversity, they are creating oxygen, they have many virtues, and it's a patrimony for the world in itself. But you have two countries that are struggling with their own economies, with their own priorities every day. So are they going to manage their forest, which are of international interest, with their own money? Today, yes. One tool has been designed to make that better, is the idea of market tool. Please, I have a better practice. I will give you a certificate. If the consumers are really happy with that certificate, they will pay it better. Such tools are like RSPO. And I compare, I am very naughty. Oh, that's forest in 1962, by the way, and that's forest nowadays. And the red is, the white is what was taken by the rubber. The red was what was taken by half rubber, half palm oil. So the palm oil is not the complete guilty. The bigger guilty of deforestation in Malaysia is rubber. It was under the British and under the Tunku. So, and that's the Indonesian vision of it. So yes, coming to that. RSPO is the quadrant on the left down. RSPO is what people call a private tool. It's the market that is ruling. You know the idea, you make a better product, people will buy it. And they may buy it a little better. Or if they don't want that product, they will not buy it if you don't have the certificate. It's another way to sanction you. And we know the history of that because 20 years before the development of that tool, you had another tool developed in the forest for the same reasons. People were concerned about the tropical forest. So they developed the FSC that became very quickly working in the temperate forest, but took a lot of time to work in the tropical forest for some other reasons. FSC is ruled. And you have another tool that I call institutional tool. And here is not the rule of market, it's the rule of law. In your country, you have laws. Those laws are what makes you to have good behaviors. You have policemen, you have people, income tax, everything is checked, and that makes you behaving again a certain standard. And when you have those standards, your administration, forest administration, for example, or agricultural administration, may be at a certain level, and you may qualify to such standards because of the rule of law in your country. And you have countries that say, okay, we issue certificates that become mandatory for everyone because it's the rule of law. So in the case of PEFC, it's slightly different because PEFC came after the rule of law. But the MSPO that you are speaking about, Malaysian sustainable palm oil, is this kind of product. At the end, it will be mandatory. Or it is already mandatory, I don't know. ISPO is also the case. And it's a tool by the governments, not only to be certified, because people complain, yes, your government certification is a copycat of the real certification, is not as good. But it's not the same, actually. It doesn't fulfill the same requirement. Because if I am Indonesian or Malaysian, I use that certificate to reform my agriculture and to force the people, by making it mandatory, to apply to the standards. And I upgrade the standards slowly by slowly. So it's a slow, change, which is compulsory. We may take years, so that's why the people who don't like it says, oh, it's a substandard compared to RSPO, which is straight away good, which itself did change and progress. So you have this kind of tool. And what we know by the history of the forest and the palm, there is indeed a competition in between. But the state can take in charge and become state, and rule it. So today, that's the debate. Whether the palm oil is ruled by the market rule, and there is a slight problem. Because today the people wanted to pay more for palm oil, which is the standard of RSPO. I will talk under the control of Chandran, but I have this figure from RSPO website. What you see, to me, is terrifying because it increased very fast, and now it's sailing. For an economics, as I am, it tells you a market signal. The market is not ready to take more. Or the market is anticipating that it will come down. The bigger share of the market for the RSPO is the Western countries. Either the Western countries are expecting to buy less palm oil in the future, so they have stopped to use RSPO. Either the market is saturated. I don't know which one. But it's for sure that if you are EU and you're selling, I will stop to buy some part of the palm oil to make biofuel, you send such market. Of course, the EU regulation was not in the 15. It's just this year. So I don't think that the EU regulation is the cause of this selling. But it doesn't add some more optimism to the idea. So my language would say, better using, those market tools have a niche market and they are good for some market and some purposes. But if you want to save the whole range of palm oil, they will not all go to the European market, to the market that are sensitive to that kind of tool. You need to have also the institutional tool. But they will not do enough. You need also to, and that I am praising for my own church or mosque, here is CIRAD, and what the work we are doing is not giving money to the palm oil, is doing research with the Malaysians, with the Indonesians, together to increase the level of knowledge on how to do it sustainably. That money is way more spent because it belongs to Indonesian. I have around here some of my students. They are working with me. In 20 years, they will be the elite of the agricultural sector here. And if we grew them with UPM well, we groom them well, they will practice good sustainability standards. I should have 20 of them instead of a few of them. I should have maybe hundreds of them. And then we would ensure better, for sure, the good sustainability standards in such crops.
By the way, I think, Jean-Marc, you also work out of UPM, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Part of
so they are UPM
office.
students, international students, yeah.